It's Archangel Michael floating over my bed, and he's telepathically basically chewing my ass.
Aspen Roots.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Aspen Roots podcast. We're your hosts, Sophia and Brandon. And if you like true spiritual stories, you found the right podcast for you. Today, we're so excited to welcome Ed from South Florida. And Ed is the author of the book Modern Mystic, a handbook for multidimensional living, which is available on Amazon. And the link for the book will be in the description. Welcome, Ed.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. And so Ed was one of our teachers at the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, and he's been involved with that school for about 20 years. And he is a natural born storyteller. He told me so many stories that just inspired me so much. And so part of preparation for our podcast episodes, we like to get a list of the stories from our guests and organize the whole thing. But with Ed, I knew I didn't need to worry about any of that. Ed is going to sit here and blow our minds with stories of all different topics. I'm sure we're going to hear about remote viewing and angels and hypnosis and so on and so forth. So I'm going to start us off with a quick story of mine that relates to Ed, and then I'm going to let Ed take it from there. And so Ed studied remote viewing, and you learned this in the Monroe Institute. Is that right?
Well, I did a course there, which was introductory, and Skip Atwater, who was the director of research at the Monroe Institute at that time, he said if I wanted to study it in depth, he recommended two people. One of them was Paul Smith in Texas, and the other one was Lynn Buchanan in New Mexico. So I contacted Lynn, and I underwent formal training with him over a period of like 2 years to learn the fundamentals of how they did it in the military program called Stargate. And all of those guys that ended up, the famous ones like Lynn and Joe McMoneagle and some of the others you may have heard of, they all had an association with the Monroe Institute and had an association with Robert Monroe, which coincidentally Barbara Brennan had a relationship with Robert Monroe. She actually did a healing on him the night before he passed away. And his stepson, A.J. Honeycutt, told me all about that because his wife had already died and he had wanted to join her, but he was kind of stuck between this dimension and going to meet her. And Barbara did a healing, and she said, and she told us later, well, she told me personally about that, is that healer's not always here to try to keep somebody alive. It's maybe to help them either communicate with other dimensions or make the passage to another dimension. And that's what she helped him do.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love all the connections, and I love the extra depth you added because I did read the little bit that was in Barbara's most recent book, but she doesn't explain all the details there that you learned. So thank you for sharing that.
I love that you share that about healers too, that it's not just all for the happiness,
Absolutely. And so Ed was a teacher in our second year of school, and he did a exercise one week on remote viewing. And I had never tried this before, and I literally had the thought, okay, well, I'm going to suck at this. And
yeah, me too. I've had that thought.
He gives us a target, and the title of the target is just a string of, I think it was like 6 numbers, and says, okay, I have a picture here. It has 6 numbers as the title. What's the picture? I'm in Colorado. We're on Zoom. Ed's in Florida. And I'm like, oh boy, okay, well, I'm just going to do what they've taught us in school so far. And I grounded my energy, and I made sure I opened my chakras, and I went to the frequency that we were taught to go to, and sat there, and I just saw this image in my mind, and it was black and white. It's very gray. I see shapes. So some people, they see all the details. They can read books that are closed on desks. I just see shapes. And so I just drew the shapes that I saw. And sure enough, when he exposed the picture, I nailed it. It was this big barn with this white fence going in front of it. And I drew all those shapes, and I couldn't believe it. I blew my own socks off with that one. And so that's when I realized that I could do this. This is possible, and it absolutely fascinates me. So thank you for introducing me to remote viewing.
Yeah, well, most of us have to work past the disbelief. And you did that very well.
That's exactly what it was. So I need to practice more. Just need to dedicate more time and practice to it because it still fascinates me.
Well, you know what the theory is that the remote viewers have is that your subconscious mind has access to all the information in the universe, but your conscious mind, your ego, doesn't want to let go of its control. And so it keeps the subconscious mind kind of at bay. So the whole protocol with remote viewing that they use is to keep the conscious mind busy, your ego busy, doing a bunch of stuff on the paper where your subconscious mind can bring the information in. So that's where the magic happens. So they use their protocol to distract the conscious mind so the subconscious mind can come in. And I got to the point where I realized, well, and I discussed this with Lynn, my remote viewing teacher, that what if you embrace your disowned parts of yourself and you really embrace your subconscious mind and you call on it as an integral part of yourself and you don't have it sitting on a shelf? And this embracing all the disparate parts of your personality really is instrumental. Because I talked to Joe McMoneagle about this, his famous remote viewer. He says he doesn't do the protocol anymore. He just quiets his mind and relaxes, and the information comes. So once you make friends with yourself and learn to love yourself, this information can flow. You don't need the protocol. And that's kind of the conclusion I came to. The whole reason that I went to the Monroe Institute in the first place, because I had a childhood history of just constant astral travel, because I had a real abusive childhood. So I was just out of my body all the time, and I thought it was really natural. And when I read Robert Monroe's books, I said, oh, well, this is like going home. So I read all 3 of his books. Then I went to the Monroe Institute, and I ended up going there like a matter of 10 times, and I had some extraordinary experiences. I described most of them in my book. And that leads me to my stories about angels. So I had my first experience with seeing angels was the first time I went to the Monroe Institute. There was 2 ladies there that were Barbara Brennan students. And you know how it is. You always got to do so many healings to do your homework.
Yep.
Well, one of them had actually lived close to the Monroe Institute. She brought her healing table and she was offering free healings. I
Nice.
said, well, why not?
Yeah.
So there was a spare room there at the Monroe Institute, and I climb up on the table, and she's in the middle of doing this healing. I look over in the corner of the room, and there's 2 angels. And they were the classic ones you see that look like babies with little wings. The wings weren't flapping, but they were in the corner of the room, and they were watching the whole thing. And I was thinking, well, there's something to this, because I had Barbara's book on my shelf for years, and I never opened it and never really looked into it. But when I saw angels in the corner of the room while I'm getting my first healing, I says, well, I got to look into this.
Wow.
That's how I ended up coming to Barbara Brennan School, is because I saw these angels and I said, well, this is exceptional. First time I'd ever seen anything like that. I've had a lot of astral travel and supernatural experiences, but I had never seen any angels. And now I'm seeing them. So that was the first time.
That is
That's
amazing.
awesome.
I love hearing people's stories about how they ended up at the school, and I'd never heard
Yeah.
yours before. So,
Yeah.
Right.
were these angels floating in the air? Were they standing on the ground? Did you talk to
No,
them?
they were floating up in the corner of the room. There was 2 of them, and they were watching everything that was going on. They were just there watching, and it just felt so peaceful that you don't know what to think. It's puzzling. It's exceptional. You hear about angels, but to see them for the first time is pretty mind-blowing.
That's
So
so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that they're in the corners of the room, because we've heard that if they're protecting the corners, that, possible darkness can enter in the corners of the room. So it's like they were keeping the light in the room and keeping the space safe for your healing, I feel like.
You're right. When I look back on it now, it's almost like they were setting the template.
Beautiful.
You're right.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I got to specify, did you see these angels with your eyes open or with your eyes shut or both?
Oh, no, I was looking at him with my eyes open because I was curious. I was curious about what she was doing to me, moving her hands around on my body, and I could feel the energy in my body that she was, channeling energy. But I had my eyes wide open, and after that, I had a hard time closing them. After you see angels in the room, it's like, okay, what else is going on?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was that was a wake up. So fast forward for a couple of years. Okay, I'm in the school. I think I'm in the middle of my second year. And by that time, I had gotten divorced. When I started on this spiritual journey, my wife at the time was not real accepting of it. She thought I'd lost my mind.
Which is kind of the goal, right?
Well, I'm having all kinds of supernatural experiences at the time because there was two things. I was going to the Monroe Institute and I started doing breath work. And I think it's either because of the Monroe Institute or because of the breath work, I think I had a Kundalini awakening because I started seeing things all the time. I could see sparks coming out of my heart chakra. I had a visitation from some alien being, which was like only thing I could describe it was about the size of a basketball, but it was an orb that was this beautiful pinkish blue color, and it was floating around the room for about 5 or 10 minutes when I woke up. And it started communicating with me telepathically. It said, well, you just were visiting my dimension, and now I came back to visit yours to let you know what you experienced in that other dimension was real.
Wow.
And to show you what I look like. And, so I was having all kinds of experiences like that. For the whole time I was a student in the school, I was having those experiences.
You mentioned Kundalini awakening, and I know every time somebody says that, somebody else says, what is that? So in your
Yeah.
terms, can you define what you mean by that?
Well, the closest I can pinpoint where I think it happened for me is that I found this woman. I had been inquiring about doing breath work, but the woman that was referred to me lived up in Tampa, which is a good like 3 or 4 hours away. So I was talking to a friend of mine who did body work, and he said, oh, I know a lady that does that here, Corey Cameraman. And so he gave me her number and I called her, and I went and did the first breathwork session, and I could feel it in my first chakra. And then I said, well, there's something to this. So I made a standing appointment for every week to go back and see her and do breath work. And it was almost like it was ordained. The second week, my second chakra lit up. The third week, the third chakra lit up. And then the seventh week, my seventh chakra lit up. And the only way I can describe it was an energetic orgasm. I never didn't want it to end. And I think that was the trigger. That was the Kundalini awakening when I had that just unbelievable, and it lasted for like a half an hour where I just felt like I had died and gone to heaven. It was that powerful.
Wow.
And it was like, I had never had an experience like that before or since then. But I think that opened up something in me that triggered a lot of these experiences. And that's how
Interesting.
I describe my experience of Kundalini. I don't know other people, what their experience is.
Cool. Well, that's why I like asking the question. You ask it 100 times, you get 100 different answers, and they're all fascinating.
Also, during that time, since I got divorced, I started dating and I was partying and just having a wild time. And I went to see my BIP one day, and it was Christy Firth. And I walk in the room and she says, you have Archangel Michael with you. And I said, well, I was a little skeptical about that because I didn't see him. And I was raised as a Catholic, and I kind of tried to get away from religion. So I'm very spiritual, but, that sounds too religious to me, that this Archangel Michael's there.
And can I just interject there for our listeners who don't know what a BIP is? That is a Brennan Integrated Practitioner, also known as like a counselor. And you're required to do 18 sessions per school year. So continue, Ed.
Yeah. So I go in and she works with me, and she actually went as far as to show me she had a book from a woman who channeled angels and painted pictures of them. So she showed me a painting this woman had painted of Archangel Michael, and he was like a magnificent looking guy with curly blonde hair, very powerful looking. So I kind of dismissed that. And about a week or 10 days later, after a weekend of partying and staying up all night playing music and dancing and all this stuff, I wake up, I think it was on a Monday morning, somebody's shaking me. And it's Archangel Michael floating over my bed, and he's telepathically basically chewing my ass.
Oh,
He's telling me,
really?
you're partying too much. You're straying from your spiritual path. You need to basically get your shit together and stop partying so much and pay attention to what you need to learn for this lifetime. And it
Oh
was
my
like, that
God.
shook me up. So that was
Wow.
a totally different experience of the second time I saw an angel. He's basically warning me I better get my shit together.
I love that story. I've never heard that. I'm full of goosebumps right now.
So that's what, okay. And I dramatically changed. I really toned it down and started paying attention. I started doing meditating and I started doing yoga, and, it's like something like that happens. It changes your life. So
Oh,
that,
certainly.
Oh my
So
gosh, yeah.
was his demeanor very serious, or did he
he was
deliver it with
serious.
love?
It wasn't, basically, he was just there letting me know that I had a purpose in this life and I'm straying from it, and I better get my act together and pay attention to what I need to learn and stop partying so much.
Well, thank God you did, because you
Yeah.
might not have ended up here, impacting our lives the way you have. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to ask, what did he look like? How
He
did you
looked
perceive
exactly
him?
like the painting. He was this handsome, big, I mean, full size, maybe even bigger looking than a human. If I had to compare him to a human, that he was somebody that was at least 6'5", muscular, very handsome, but really intense. And it's kind of funny, with a couple of my close friends, I've shared these experiences, or people that have read my book, and they said, well, God, you must be really special to have angels appearing to you. And I says, I don't look at it like that. I look at it is that I'm so freaking hard-headed that God's got to send angels down to get my attention and to get
Yeah.
to stay on the path and whatever my divine purpose is. Okay, so
Wow.
I don't look at it like I'm some kind of special gifted spiritual guru. I look at it as like, okay, I'm a hard case, and he had to send these angels down to get my attention and keep me on the right path. So
I
I
love that.
I love that perspective. It's probably
Yes.
a very similar thing happening to me in my life as far as that goes. So
yeah.
you're laying down. Was he standing up?
He's hovering over the bed, looking into my eyes and
Wow.
telepathically just telling me everything that I just shared with you about, and pay attention to this, what I need to learn in the spiritual path, because I need to share it. And I ultimately, I realized part of it was writing that book, because a lot of the times I didn't see angels, but I knew they were around me, and it was almost like they were nagging me to finish that book.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like,
Oh.
okay, keep reminding me, you got to finish this book. So finally I did that about a year ago.
And so the book and that original story about 20 years apart or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so did you just say, okay, and then he left, or
Well, he
did,
was there for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then he just kind of evaporated, and I'm shaking there, laying in bed going, holy shit. Maybe I do need to get my shit together and pay attention.
wow.
And I did. I changed. I toned it down a lot. Like I said, I started doing yoga, meditating, and went more on a spiritual. I mean, I was still having a good time, but I really toned it down, because I was drinking a lot and just, partying. I was single for the first time in, 18 years. And
Mhm.
I felt like I was making up for lost time. So anyway, that wasn't in the plan for me. And
Wow.
then the third time I saw angels was when I was dating my current wife. And that was totally different than the first 2 times.
Okay.
And I sleep with a CPAP machine because I have sleep apnea. And this was like 22, 23 years ago when I first met her. We're dating, and I spent the night at her house, and I was keeping her awake because I snore so bad because of the sleep apnea. So I decided, oh, well, I'm keeping her awake. I went out and was sleeping on the couch, and I wake up, and there's this unbelievable angelic music playing in the room, and I'm going, somebody turn a stereo on? Because it was that loud that
Really?
it sounded like a stereo. And then I open my eyes and look up, and there's angels. And these angels this time, they look like teenage girls. and they were doing laps around the ceiling throughout the house. There was at least 3 or 4 of them, and they were doing laps around the house, and this music was playing, and I'm going, what the hell's going on here? Did I go into another dimension or whatever? And I just laid there just in shock. And I heard her get up, and I says, you're not going to believe what just happened. And I said, well, there was this unbelievable music, this beautiful music. And then there was angels flying around your house. And I tried to describe what they looked like to her. And she said, oh yeah, well, I'm glad you've seen them because I've been seeing them for a while.
No way.
Sometimes they hover over my son's bed at the time when he was young, he was like 3 or 4 years old. She'd look over and she'd see angels hovering over his bed.
Wow.
And then she heard the music and saw the angels flying around too. So I was the first person that validated what she'd been seeing for a few years. So it was a
Oh.
relief for her.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, right? That is so amazing.
She was afraid
Oh
to
my
tell
God.
anybody about it.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my
So
God.
that was the third time. That was basically what it made me realize is that she was the one.
Hmm.
I was thinking that when you said it, like, what
Yeah.
great confirmation for the person you're dating now, you know?
Yeah. So okay. This is the one. This is the one. I know I'm in the right place at the right time.
So it
So-
sounds like
Beautiful.
she's seen it multiple times. Does
yeah.
she still see it? Have you seen it again?
No, but we both feel the presence all the time. We don't have visual, but it's just like. Plus, the other thing, what I've come to realize too, if you're on the right path, these unbelievable synchronicities will unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly what I get now. Is just like you'll just think something, and in the next day or two, everything will just like this. This is not chance. You know,
Mhm.
you'll have a thought, and then I can't think of any instances, but it's constant. You know you're on the right spiritual path if you just start the synchronicities in your life. So that's how more the guidance comes for me and for her now is the synchronicities that we both experience, sometimes separately and sometimes together. And we'll just look at each other like, okay, we knew that was going to happen.
We're big into the synchronicities, and it's constant in our life. And some of our earlier podcast episodes go into some of those stories. So yeah, it's always a treat to experience those and notice them.
Yeah, so I mentioned to you when we talked before about hypnosis, and I had an interesting experience with hypnosis.
Yeah, of all your stories, I've never heard any hypnosis stories.
So I read a book. It was Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. There was 2 women in the 70s that went to the Eastern Bloc countries, Albania, Russia, all those countries over the Belarus. They explored what they were researching as far as paranormal and supernatural stuff. And one of the things that they discovered was that these scientists and psychologists were experimenting with hypnosis, and they would hypnotize these college students and convince them that they were these masters of music, like convince them, okay, put you on hypnosis and say you have the qualities and all the skills of Beethoven or Bach or one of these famous composers and performers. And within a few weeks or months, they were performing like these masters of music with no training.
No,
So they were
way.
tapping into the collective unconscious somehow, and these people were embodying that. And I said, well, I got to try that. So I was going to a spiritualist church at the time, and it was run by a guy named Red Duke, who was clairvoyant. You'd walk in the room and he'd say, hey, you got 3 guides with you today. Or, he would just tell you stuff about you that he couldn't normally know. So
Yeah.
it was fascinating to go there. But I met this lady named Terry Robinson who worked professionally as a hypnotist. And I got to talking to her, and I told her what I had in my mind after I read that book. And she says, well, come to my office and we'll see what happens. So I think the second or third time I went there, I happened to be a good subject for hypnosis. I laid down on the couch and she hypnotizes me, and I said, just take me really deep and see where I go. And so I'm just kind of feel like I'm floating in another dimension, and I'm surrounded by Smurfs.
Smurfs. Really?
Smurfs in
Of
canoes.
all things.
In canoes.
Smurfs in canoes. I'm surrounded by them, and they're just delighted that I'm in their dimension. They said, we don't get many visitors like you here.
Huh.
Wow.
And basically the communication was telepathic. And, and that was delightful. She says, okay, so what else do you see? And next thing I know, this friend of mine that lives in Nevada, his face pops up. I said, oh, I see William. I see his face. She said, well, go see what he's doing. So instantly I'm transported to this warehouse. He's an electrician. And I see him pushing like a rod into a big metal cabinet, which is confusing to me because I knew he was an electrician, but I didn't know why he would be pushing this big metal rod into this cabinet. And then I hear this noise. There's this grinding noise that's like deafening. So I make a mental note of everything that I see going on. And she's going to take me out of hypnosis. She said, well, what are you doing the rest of the day? I said, I'm going to go play golf with a couple of my buddies. So she said, I want you to visualize hitting the ball directly into the hole. And so, okay, I visualized that. So that afternoon, I went home and I called William and I described exactly what he was doing. What I didn't know about electricians, when they have a real big, heavy cable, they got an electrician on one end pulling, they've got this big cable lubricated, and the other guy, electrician's pushing because it's really stiff. And he was at a Genentech laboratory in California doing the wiring for this big laboratory. And what I described was exactly what he was doing. And I said, well, what
Wow.
about that noise? And he says,
Wow.
well, you could hear the noise. I said, yeah. He said, well, there was a guy grinding pipes in the hallway and it was really annoying, but it had filled up the whole room. So I could hear what was going on and I could see what was going on just from astral travel triggered by hypnosis. And then
Wow.
that
That's
afternoon,
incredible.
that
Yes.
afternoon, I'm a lousy golfer, but that afternoon I
Me
was
too.
exceptional and I didn't get a hole in one, but I was 200 yards from the hole and I hit the ball really, really high and it came down and went straight into the hole. And of course, these
What?
guys I'm playing with, they're just losing it because I'm the lousiest golfer among the four of us.
Oh
And
my
I just
God.
did that.
That is so incredible. Oh my goodness.
So that shows
Seriously.
you how pliable your subconscious mind is.
Wow.
So,
That's tremendous. I love the validation in the latter two, but what's going on with the Smurfs and the canoes? What do they have to say about them for
well,
themselves there?
I've come to the conclusion that anything we can imagine as humans exists in some other
Mhm.
dimension.
I've heard that
Mhm.
before. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
believe that. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
And so, Smurfs got a special place in my heart now because I met them in their dimension.
That's so cool.
I love it.
The other thing that I still puzzle about was I was on a road trip. I drove up to Ohio to visit my relatives, and I was driving through south on I-75 through Kentucky. And I remember looking at a sign and said, oh, I'm going to stop at the next exit, which is coming up, to get gas. Well, 2 hours later, I'm back there in the same place. I got 2 hours of missing time. And you hear those stories about people being abducted by
Mhm.
aliens where they have missing time. I had exactly 2 hours where I see this exit. Okay, it's coming up in a couple of miles. I'm going to pull off here. Then it's blank. And 2 hours later, I look at my watch and I'm there in front of the sign again. And I asked Lynn Buchanan, my remote viewing teacher, about it. And he's had experience with aliens and spaceships and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I don't know if he's ever going to write about it. And I don't talk about in detail what he shared with me, but I asked him about it and he really didn't want to talk about it. It's like, you're going to have to
Wow.
figure that one out yourself.
Which also brings an element of time travel, which is something I can't really wrap my head around, but I like to contemplate its existence because I believe it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I did have an experience where I traveled back in time. It's one of my Monroe experiences. The name of the program, and I don't know if they still have this program, called Heartlines. And it was about getting in touch with yourself. And like I said, I had a pretty harsh childhood. There was a lot of verbal and physical abuse. And I had an experience there where you were supposed to go back in time to visit yourself as a child. And then I realized that I was like 6 years old, that somebody came and visited me and comforted me. And I realized it was me.
Oh,
So I had
wow.
traveled back in time to comfort myself as a child because of that Heartlines program at Monroe.
That's crazy
That
because
is
I've never
amazing.
heard that from anybody, but that's an idea that I consistently have in my own mind that we can do this. I wonder how many times I've done it for myself, and I've never heard anyone talk about this.
Yeah,
So,
it's real. It's real. You can go back. I'm assuming you could go and visit yourself in the future too, but it was really helpful, you know, that you have this divine essence that can travel back and forth in time and space.
It is so
wow.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I really felt it. It's like, okay, you're really never alone. Yeah, I guess it was me in the form of my higher self that went and visited and comforted my young abused self.
It's interesting. Yesterday, I just went grocery shopping by myself, and I was like, but I'm not alone. I've got my guides with me. And I was like, my mom's with me. She's on the other side, and I have my guides with me. I'm rolling with the guides today. That's what I told myself.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because at times I felt like I had, when you find you're just kind of randomly wandering in the store and you discover something that's like, wow, I didn't even know this existed and I'm buying it. I think we have shopping guides.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
It's so cute. I love it.
If they can snap us to the clock at a certain time, they can snap us to a shelf for a certain
Yeah.
item, I'm sure.
Yeah. All these beings that are with us and help us, and all the subtle ways and big ways too. But yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, I do have one other story to share. I don't want to run too long, but I went through a period of almost 2 years while I was a student where I would see stuff happen before it happened constantly.
Mm.
I talk about that in my book, where it's just I could see the future, and sometimes it would be 2 minutes ahead of time, or an hour ahead of time, or it would be the next day. To give you an example, one time I was at the gym during this period of time, doing the Stairmaster, and it's like a TV screen opened up, and I saw a pickup truck hit the back of a dump truck, and I realized that the guy was instantly killed. And I was thinking, well, I don't drive a pickup truck, so I don't think this is a warning for me, but why did I pick this up? So the next day, I actually saw the accident right after it happened, and the guy was killed. And it was a
Wow.
dump truck that was parked on the side of the interstate. And for some reason, this guy drove off the interstate and hit the back of the dump truck at full speed and was killed instantly. And it happened to be about the same time of day that I was on that Stairmaster in the gym. So I'm thinking that there was some kind of a wave of
Oh,
energy from the violent death that I picked up. I don't know, but I was having those experiences almost daily.
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. That's incredible to have that experience. Yeah. Absolutely incredible.
Before we call it, I was wondering if you could share us a remote viewing story.
Well, the most profound remote viewing story, well, there's a couple, but Lynn used to tell me remote viewing is a martial art. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And finally, I had the experience that convinced me. You experience remote viewing with your whole body. Because one time I was working on a target, and he would give us targets, and it was like the same thing that I gave you was a photograph in a sealed envelope with a 6-digit number attached to it. And I'm working on my own on this target, and I'm sitting at a table, I got the paper and I'm doing all the protocol that they use in the Stargate. And I start bouncing up and down in my chair, and I'm, what the hell's going on? I'm in Florida. We don't have earthquakes. Well, why am I have this sensation where I'm bouncing up and down? So I finally finished the target, and I kind of half got the target. I saw these rolling hills, and I drew them, and wide open spaces and everything. But the target was a guy riding a horse across the open plains, and he was bouncing up and the
Oh,
horse.
I love
Wow.
that.
So I picked up the motion of the guy bouncing up and down on the horse. And okay, now, Lynn, I know what you're talking about. Martial art, you're going to feel it. If you don't see it, you may feel it, you may hear it. There's so many different aspects of a target and how it comes to you. So
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
that
And-
was that was one of them. It's like I had a lot of interesting times with him. Probably the best hit I ever did when I was working with Lynn as the modulator, he was the person leading me in the target. A really good moderator knows how to get you to go places that you can't think of yourself. He's like, go up above the target. What does it look like from above? Things like that. Well, I had a target. It was a photograph of Corpus Christi, Texas, taken like 100 years ago from the top of a tall building, looking down on the city of Corpus Christi, Texas. And I actually bilocated. Okay, here's this. I'm in New Mexico, so it was like 600 miles away, 100 years in the past. And I actually bilocated to the target. I was in an air-conditioned room, and I started sweating like I was actually there in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is hot and humid. And I was describing everything. I was drawing. I drew exactly what I saw in the picture. And the one thing that struck my mind is there was a policeman standing on the corner. The unusual thing about this policeman, he was wearing a green uniform, and I'd never seen a policeman wear a green uniform before. Sure enough, in this picture, the policeman was wearing a green uniform. And so I
Wow.
caught that kind of anomaly. It was an anomaly to me because most policemen wear either a tan uniform or a blue uniform.
Right.
But there's this guy in this green uniform, it looked almost like a military uniform. So it was like, that was amazing. You go back in time and bilocate. I actually felt like I was there describing everything. So reality is very pliable, a lot more pliable than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
That's tremendous. And this is good for me to hear because I have been viewing remote viewing as like just clairvoyance. So to hear your horse story and you sweating and bilocating, like it'd be a full body experience. That's expanding my perception and awareness around this. So hopefully I can use this as I go forward. So I appreciate hearing this.
Yeah, you just gotta open up to the possibility. Well, it's like what Barbara used to always say, consider the possibility.
Right. Yeah. And then also like being a healer, she talks about the different ways to sense subtle energy, and it's not just clairvoyance,
Yeah.
there's all the different ways to sense it. And so there's a parallel there.
Yeah. There's magic open to us if we just allow ourselves to consider the possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. I think this stuff is like a universal language. Everyone speaks in synchronicities and miracles, and doesn't matter what language or what country you're from. We all want to believe in the goodness of the divine energies around us supporting us, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and I've come to the conclusion that, you read the Bible and I read all the experiences of miracles happening. I think those miracles happen every day. We just kind of want to push it away and that just happened in ancient times. No, I sincerely believe miracles happen among us all the time.
Yes.
And we're surrounded by all these other entities and these dimensions around us that influence us. And in some cases, you get a hard case like me where they show up in person in order to get my attention. But yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
It's absolutely real. And
Beautiful.
And be patient with the process too.
Yeah. And be kind and loving to yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, that right here, this is leading into the soulful send-off. So thank you for telling your stories, because uplifting is the word that comes to me. It's kind of like how Archangel Michael showed up in your life and propelled you into your greater purpose here in this lifetime. That's how I feel about you showing up in my lifetime and sharing your stories, because they uplift me.
I'm honored and humbled by this experience with you and Sophie. Thank you.
Yes, it's
Thank
this
you.
experience and all the ones in the past and all the
Yes.
ones in the future. And so I'm motivated and inspired by you and the stories you tell and the essence you share with us all. So thank you so much for being here to do that with us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and you're such an inspiration to me as a teacher, and just showing up here today is like, wow, your stories have broadened my mind even more. And I have so much more lucidity. I feel like I can tap into the lucidity of the different dimensions and time. And I was like tracking into what you're talking about, and it's all just so real. So thank you for being such an inspiration, for showing up here and sharing your stories, and for bringing your essence with you. You have such a light heart when you tell all these stories too. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful sharing here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity and doing the work you're doing to, spread things like this out on the net. This is the way to go. This podcast is a jewel.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Aspen
Visit us at aspenroots.love.